Hello folks, in this tutorial we're going to look at the motion blur feature in Adobe After Effects. Now to get us started I'm going to get you to just have a look at this circle I've got moving back and forth on the screen on the x-axis. Now if you look at it, it's got a rather nasty sort of strobing effect. If you start to do any animation work in After Effects, you'll soon find that objects don't appear to be moving that they would, in the manner that they would in the real world. If an object was moving back and forth in front of our eyes, in the real world it will blur slightly. And the problem with After Effects is it doesn't intuitively add these blurs that we'd see in the real world. So if we look at this circle, it's got a rather nasty strobe as it hits on the left and hits on the right. Now the way to get round that is to just go down here. I'm going to zoom in just slightly for you. We've got these tools here, and you want to make sure that this column is activated. As ever, toggle your switches, check your columns just to make sure it's on. But this little tab here says Motion Blur, as we can see, simulates shutter duration. And it's the Motion Blur tab you want to click on here. Let me just zoom back out again. So let's add the Motion Blur for this layer. Let's render it back out and see what it does. Again, it's got a nice blur on it now. It looks a little bit more realistic. If we now compare it to the one without the blur, let's put both on, you'll see the benefits of adding the motion blur. The bottom layer has got that nasty strobe effect, where the layer above has got a lovely smooth blur, the way in which we see motion in the real world. But you can improve it even further. Look at this third example I've got here. And probably the best way I can explain this is I'm going to actually just very slowly cycle through the animation. So watch, keep your eyes on the bottom one and compare it to the one at the top. As the bottom one approaches the right hand corner, the blur eases up and disappears. And that's actually this one here more realistic, because if an object did head towards a wall, sort of slow down, it would momentarily stop in space. And of course, when it momentarily stops in space, the blur should disappear. If you look at the one at the top, the blur's still on, even though it's actually paused, so the blur shouldn't be there. So what we want is this one at the bottom to be our ideal, and it can be easily done. If you open the transform properties here, you'll see that I've applied an Easy Ease key to all of those keyframes. This means that when the object, this one here, hits the wall or the edge of the screen on the right, the motion blur eases up, pauses for a second, and then reapplies itself as it heads off in the other direction. So Easy Ease is something you really ought to consider when you're adding a motion blur. And of course, just to reiterate it, you can do Easy Ease by doing a right click on the keyframe, Keyframe Assistant, and adding Easy Ease. So those are your three options then. On the top, motion blur, one in the middle, no motion blur, and the ideal is the one at the bottom, motion blur with Easy Ease keyframes. Okay folks, hope you found that useful. See you in the next tutorial.